Before we get started, I just want to say a couple things about, well, first off, my pen has not been working, and it appears it is now, so I'm going to hope for the best today. I ordered some more batteries to see if that will make a difference. So if it stops, I'm so sorry. The quadratic formula is, in my opinion, usually my last choice to solve. Okay, I take that back. Completing the square would be my last choice to solve. I would use quadratic formula before that because I personally would never choose completing the square because, as we've discussed, it's my least favorite. So I always look at something and I first decide, can I factor? And that's always my first choice, is to factor. And I don't know that that's everyone's first choice. A lot of people jump right to the quadratic formula because they like it. So I start with factor, and then if I can't factor, I choose the quadratic formula. So normally I would say to you, yes, you have to memorize this. Well, we're doing distance learning, so you won't be memorizing it. But this is something that will kind of come up for the rest of your life. I teach pre-calc, and I'm teaching it again next year. And quadratic formula is really important. So quadratic formula helps us sometimes with those that aren't like, can you solve by algebra? No. Can I factor it? No. Then I default to the quadratic formula. Also, if you have a TI 8384 calculator, you can program the formula into your calculator, or whatever calculator you have. So if that's something that you're interested in, and that's something I usually let my kids do, is program it, because if you put in all the work to program it, I'm totally fine with you using it. Quadratic formula will give you both real and non-real answers. So if you want your calculator to give you the non-real answers, you need to make sure that when you're in the mode, you have the A plus BI mode on, because that's really hard to read. You want it to give you those complex answers. And so for some of you, you may need to do a little Googling, but make sure that it's in that mode. And then just one last thing is, you will notice right here that the quadratic formula has a plus and minus, because we've always talked about how all of these should have two answers. Every quadratic has two zeros, okay? And it has two because this is 2 here. And so you always have to have two answers. The only time you don't have two answers is when, the answer is the same twice. So it's 2 and 2 again. And so that's called a double root. But you technically still have two answers. So let's just be careful. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. There are also, if you go on YouTube, there are songs to help you memorize this. It goes to Pop Goes the Weasel. And you can easily memorize this. And then if you want to sing this, sing it for everybody, and then I can put it up on Schoology so everyone can watch, that's probably worth at least 1 extra credit point. So go for that. And then my next slide here, I have the discriminant, but we're going to come back to that and do the discriminant next time. So here I have something that looks similar, but to do the quadratic formula, I need to be in ax squared plus bx plus c form. So I'm going to move this over so it's in the right spot. So x squared minus 3x minus 2 equals, oops, sorry, should be plus 2 equals 0. So then, again, my first thought would be to factor. But since I'm teaching you the quadratic formula, I think it's important that I do the quadratic formula. So you need to be able to pick these things out. So A, B, and C are just numbers. They do not have an x attached to them. That's one of the biggest mistakes I find. A is 1. That's the coefficient here. B is negative 3. And C will be 2. Okay, so now I'm just going to kind of plug it into my formula and go for it. So x equals negative b. My b is already negative, so a negative 3 would be a positive 3 plus or minus square root. Make sure that you put a parenthesis around this. You will get the wrong answer if you don't. -3 squared, your calculator without a parenthesis will give you -9. With a parenthesis, it will give you +9, and that's the right answer. Minus 4, A is 1, C is 2, then all over, even this first part, 2 times 1. So I'm going to go about simplifying. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 8 over 2. And 9 minus 8 is 1. I noticed this on some of our homeworks. Some of us left it like this. The square root of 1 is 1. It's an actual number. So now I'm over here. 3 plus or minus 1 over 2. This is not an acceptable answer. You can give me an answer that is an actual number. And I know that because when I looked at this, I thought I would factor, but I didn't. I chose quadratic formula. So 3 plus 1 over 2, 3 minus 1 over 2. If you would like to get these answers right, you have to give me the whole answer, the actual number. 4 over 2 is 2, and 2 over 2 is 1. Okay, how do I know? I would have factored this originally, and I would have said x minus 2, x minus 1, and then my x's would have been 2 and 1. And it turns out, oh look, I get the same thing. So is one more right than the other? No. Is it a preference? A lot of times it is, a lot of times it isn't. You can't factor things that give you imaginary numbers, and when I use quadratic formula, I can get those imaginary numbers. All right, so here I would maybe use the AC method, but again, I really like factoring, so I would have maybe chose that. But let's say you don't like factoring, you don't like the AC method, so you are going to choose the quadratic formula. So A is 4, B is 4, and C is 1. So let's set it up. X equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I have -4 plus or minus 16 minus 16 all over 8. Okay, hopefully you're noticing now I have -4 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 8. Okay, the square root of 0 is 0. So I have -4 plus or minus 0 over 8. Well, this is one where I'm going to get one answer. I'm not going to get two because I can't plus 0 and minus 0. Okay, so -4 over 8 is -1/2. So what does this mean? It means that it just touches one time here. Okay, and if I did it again, I would get -1/2 twice. So I technically have two answers, but why would I list the same one twice? And I think my pen stopped working. It's really convenient for me. All right. So because my pen stopped working, I'm just going to do this. Here's an example of a problem where you get a imaginary root. So I want you to make sure that you work through this one. And then my last word of warning is to be careful with the b squared minus 4ac. Okay, because if you ever have, and I'm just going to write it here, minus, using my finger because my pen stopped. If A or C is negative and you have like this, okay, negative times negative is a plus. Okay, I'm just made up some numbers. And a lot of people get mixed up with this. So as you're typing these in your calculator, make sure that you are using parentheses appropriately, because these things will happen when you need to make sure that you are adding, because you have two negatives and two negatives make a positive, and you will get the wrong answer if you're not careful. All right, so that's going to be the end of my quadratic formula because, well, my pen stopped working and I've shown you a lot of examples. Please let me know if you have questions.